You disappeared. No announcement, no farewell post, no emotional explanation to people who wouldn't have understood anyway. One day you were there, available, reachable, performing the version of yourself the world had grown comfortable with. And then, quietly, you weren't. The world kept moving, people kept scrolling, and somewhere in that silence, something began. Nobody disappears without a reason. There is always a moment, a breaking point so quiet that nobody else hears it but you. Maybe it was betrayal. Maybe it was the slow, suffocating realization that you had built your entire identity around the approval of people who thought about you far less than you thought about them. Maybe it was waking up one morning, looking at your own life, and feeling nothing. Not sadness, not anger, nothing. And realizing that nothing is the most dangerous feeling of all. You were exhausted, not physically. Something deeper. Spiritually tired in a way that sleep cannot fix, because the exhaustion wasn't coming from what you were doing. It was coming from who you were pretending to be. So you stopped. You stopped explaining yourself, stopped answering instantly, stopped making yourself available to people who were only present when they needed something from you, stopped performing contentment you didn't feel. And in that stopping, something unexpected happened. The silence didn't destroy you. It began to rebuild you. The first weeks were uncomfortable. Your mind, addicted to noise and stimulation, and the constant low hum of other people's opinions, didn't know what to do with stillness. You reached for your phone automatically, the way a person reaches for a cigarette they've already decided to quit. You opened apps before you remembered you'd chosen not to. You felt the pull of it, the desperate need to fill the quiet with something, anything, rather than sit with the unfiltered truth of your own thoughts. But you stayed with it. And slowly, beneath the discomfort, something began to surface. Clarity. Not the kind of clarity that feels good immediately. The kind that hurts first. Because when the noise stops, what rises is everything you've been using the noise to avoid. The relationships you'd outgrown but refused to leave. The potential you'd been quietly abandoning every time you chose distraction over discipline. The version of yourself you'd promised you'd become, again and again, and never quite reached. You sat with all of it, without running, without numbing, without performing okayness for an audience that wasn't even there. And then you picked up a notebook. Not your phone. A notebook. And you asked yourself the question you'd been avoiding for years. Not what looks successful. Not what impresses people. Not what makes sense on paper. What do I actually want? Who do I actually want to become? You wrote, and what came out surprised you. Because stripped of the need to perform, stripped of comparison and external expectation, what you actually wanted was simpler than you'd thought. And more honest than anything you'd said out loud in years. That notebook became your compass for everything that followed. The second month was about confrontation. The distractions were gone, and there was nowhere left to hide from yourself. You saw your patterns clearly, some of them for the first time. The way you'd sought validation to feel worthy. The way you'd made yourself smaller in certain rooms to avoid the discomfort of being seen. The way you'd mistaken being needed for being valued. These realizations didn't feel good, but they felt true. And truth, even painful truth, is the only foundation on which anything real can be built. You began to move your body with intention. You began to sleep as though your mind was worth protecting. You began to read things that challenged you rather than entertained you. And something happened that nobody tells you about before you start. Every promise you kept to yourself, no matter how small, began to rebuild the thing you'd slowly eroded over years of half-efforts and abandoned commitments. Self-respect, not the performed kind. Not confidence worn like a costume. The quiet, internal kind. The kind that doesn't need an audience. The kind that feels like finally standing on solid ground. By the third month, the loneliness had changed its texture. It no longer felt like punishment. It felt like space. Space to think without interruption. Space to feel without apologizing for it. Space to become, slowly and imperfectly, more yourself. You became more observant. The things that used to destabilize you emotionally began to feel smaller, not because life became easier, but because your capacity to hold difficulty had grown. You stopped reacting from the surface of your emotions and started responding from a deeper, calmer place. That shift is impossible to describe to someone who hasn't felt it. But once you do feel it, once you experience the difference between being controlled by your reactions and choosing your response, you understand why some people seem untouchable in a way that has nothing to do with arrogance. The fourth month, something changed externally. The few people who did see you noticed something different, not louder, not more impressive, something quieter and harder to name. You'd stopped trying to be interesting and become interesting. You'd stopped trying to be calm and become calm. The energy you'd spent performing confidence was now being invested in actually building it, and people could feel the difference even when they couldn't explain it. You learned something irreversible during that month. Desperation is visible. Need is visible. And so is the absence of it. When you stop requiring other people's approval to feel whole, you move through the world differently. People are drawn to that, not because it's a strategy, but because it's rare. Genuine groundedness in a world of performance is one of the rarest things there is. The fifth month felt strange in a specific way. You tried to return mentally to who you'd been before, and found you couldn't quite locate that person anymore. The version of you who had needed constant reassurance, who had tolerated treatment that diminished him, who had confused familiarity with belonging. That version felt distant. Not gone, exactly, but no longer the one in charge. Your standards had changed, and changed standards change everything, because standards are not what you say you want. They are what you actually accept. The moment your standards rise, your entire life begins to reorganize itself around them. The sixth month arrived quietly, and on a morning that looked like every other morning, you sat alone and understood something that cannot be taught, only lived. You had become someone you respected, not because your life had become perfect, not because the hard things had disappeared, but because you had proven, day after day, in the absence of any audience, that you could be relied upon, by yourself, for yourself. You opened the notebook. You read what you'd written at the beginning, and somewhere between the person who had written those words in desperation and the person reading them now, a transformation had occurred. Not dramatic, not sudden, but undeniable. You returned to the world, not loudly, not with an announcement or a performance. You simply showed up, the way genuinely changed people show up, without needing the room to notice. But they noticed, not because you'd become louder, because you'd become still. And stillness, real stillness, the kind earned through months of choosing discomfort over escape, carries a weight that noise never can. This is what 6 months of silence will do to a person who takes it seriously. It won't make your life easier. It will make you stronger than your life. It will give you back the relationship with yourself that modern life spent years quietly stealing. The ability to sit alone without fear. The clarity to know what you actually want. The discipline to move toward it without waiting for the perfect moment. The world will not change while you are gone, but you will. And when a person changes at that depth, the world around them has no choice but to respond differently. So if something in you recognized itself in these words, if some part of you is tired in a way you cannot explain to anyone, if some part of you knows that the life you are currently living is not yet the life you are capable of living, then perhaps it is time not to run, not to escape, to disappear on purpose, to go somewhere quiet, inside or outside, and ask the questions you have been too afraid to ask. To become, finally, the person you have been postponing. 6 months, that is all it takes. If you are willing to stay in the silence long enough to hear what it is trying to tell you. Subscribe to the Midnight Alpha. Every week, we go into the places most people are afraid to look. Not for motivation, for truth. Because the version of you that is waiting on the other side of your avoidance is worth far more than the comfort of staying where you are. That version has been patient, but time is not unlimited. And the only question that matters tonight, in the quiet, when the world finally stops demanding your attention, is this: are you ready to become him?